Welcome back to the Church-Based Marketplace Ministry class. We're so glad that you were able to join us again, and we hope that you've enjoyed what you've been hearing so far. Today we want to look at the session called Reconciliation, and over the past number of sessions we have been walking you through understanding the God of business in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we hope that you're starting to see the Bible with a new perspective, maybe with a new lens that you're looking at things, and we hope that you'll dig a lot deeper because there's a lot more to discern yet about the God of business and how he worked through his people in the Old and the New Testament. Into this session, we want to look at reconciliation, and there's 4 key aspects of reconciliation that we will be going through together. The first has to do with reconciliation that is needed between the church and the marketplace. And some of that we've been discussing, so we won't go terribly deep with that. But the second one then is the consequence of sin between people and the need for reconciliation as we work together in our various workplaces. The third one we want to look at is the need for reconciliation and how we treat creation. Between people and creation in the marketplace and in our homes, we want to look at God's call for us to be stewards. And then lastly, we want to have a reconciled perspective on wealth and stewardship. And so for this session and the next, we will be going through these 4 areas and hoping to take a bit of a deeper dive in understanding from what God intended for the role of business in the marketplace to be, to where we are today and what God's call is for us to bring restoration and reconciliation into those areas. As a reminder, we want to think about what went wrong. And there's 3 different things that went wrong and that we see in Genesis 3. And the first is that there was a rupture in the Garden of Eden that resulted in 3 different broken relationships. The first one and the most obvious one is that our relationship with God was broken. And that becomes difficult for us to understand God and know God, and of course for him to be able to relate to us with being a holy God and us being sinful. The second broken relationship was a relationship with each other, and we can see so soon after the fall that Cain kills his brother Abel, and so our relationship with each other is broken, and that brokenness is all around us. But the third one, and the one that we sometimes forget to address, is that our relationship with creation and our relationship with work was also broken. In Genesis 3, of course, we understand that the ground has been cursed, and so work becomes more difficult, but I hope by now you are seeing and understanding that we were made to work. Genesis 1 and 2 is all about us being called and equipped, blessed and empowered to do the work of being fruitful and multiplying and filling and subduing and reigning, and these are all good things. But our relationship in the fall became more difficult with creation and with work. But one thing we know is that Jesus has redeemed it. He has given the church the ministry of reconciliation, and we are equipped to do that when we are gathered, but it is when we are the church scattered that we are living out that ministry of reconciliation. And so this is what we want to look at in this session. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says, "And all of this is a gift from God who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him." And so we are to do that in how we relate to each other, obviously in how we relate to God, as well as how we relate to work and to creation, which has a direct impact as well on each other and on God. So let's go deeper with the first one, the consequence of sin between the church and the marketplace. And one of the things that we have been talking about, and hopefully you've been picking up on, is that the church is losing its influence in the marketplace. Some might be a bit bolder and say that it has lost its influence in the marketplace. The church tends to be off on its own, doing its thing, and there isn't necessarily the translation of what we are doing in our faith when we are together gathered in a building and how it applies from Monday to Saturday. And so that is something that we see that is broken. We find that church members often disqualify themselves in the marketplace by using the term, "I'm just a layperson." It's a tough phrase, "I'm just a layperson." Interestingly, we don't see the words like clergy and lay people in Scripture. That came after. And what we do see is that God calls all people his people. And so when we have influence in our spheres of influence, in our jobs, in our communities, and we disqualify ourselves when we are the church gathered, it becomes a challenge. And so what we want to do is to be able to understand that there is really no clergy and laity. It's all the people of God who have been called to different pulpits or different parishes or different gardens, whatever term that you're comfortable with. But we have been given a sphere of influence, and God is calling upon us to take our faith into every sphere of influence and be able to understand that we are an ambassador and that we are a saint and that we are a priest, as Peter says. When we fail to understand that the call to serve in the marketplace and the call to serve in the pulpit are both valid and that they are interdependent, then we have a problem. And so you heard the story of Joseph, the taxi driver. And one thing we know is that Joseph was able to go as a marketplace minister into a place that his pastor wasn't able to go. But once Joseph helped people come to Christ and that owner come to Christ, then the pastor was helping with discipleship and deepening our relationship and the equipping of the saints. And so both are valid and both are interdependent. And we need to recognize that we have to work together to respond to the same divine calling, which is reconciling all people to God. One of the things that we've come to see is that in the church there is often what we call the mistaken holiness hierarchy. And in this mistaken holiness hierarchy, we believe that pastors and missionaries are at the top of this pyramid as the most holy. Underneath them might be doctors and nurses and lawyers. Underneath them might be teachers and social workers. And many business people have told me over the years that they feel like they are at the bottom of the holiness hierarchy. They are the least holy. They are viewed as lovers of money or as secular. And what we want to be able to do is put a big X over all of that and say there is no holiness hierarchy in the church. There's simply different callings. Some of us are called to be a pulpit pastor in the church building. Some of us are called to be a pastor or a priest or however you want to call it, wherever it is God has placed us. And so we want to say there is no hierarchy because we are all working together. We all need to link arms together to be the ambassadors that God has called us to be, ambassadors of reconciliation. When marketplace Christians are reduced to a second-class status, the church is deprived of its most strategically placed soldiers who are the closest to Satan's command and control center. Remember, a few sessions ago, we talked about the fact that Satan doesn't care if you go to church or read your Bible, just don't apply it to your life. And what we want to be able to say is that when we begin to apply it to our life, especially in the workplace, especially in the marketplace, these systems of government and education and business, that's threatening some territory that the evil one does not want to give up. But right now, if we want to reclaim that darkness, we have to be able to send marketplace ministers to help them understand that the light that they have can chase away the darkness. And they don't have to have a theological degree in order to do that. They need to know that Jesus is their Lord and Savior and that they are committed disciples to Him in every place. So the church of today has shifted its focus from equipping people to having an enjoyable environment in some places. From preparing people to go, we try to create churches and buildings that encourage people to come and to get. You heard Dr. Walker talk about the come-to-get church versus the come-to-go church. And there are too many churches that spend a lot of money on their buildings and the sound equipment and the best seating and even churches that have coffee shops and libraries and everything. And the idea is that we are gathering into a building, but we're not being equipped and sent out to be the church every day of the week. And so we have to think through how to change our focus and have that paradigm change as well. The modern church has become a complex organization built around programs that are focused on keeping members connected to the institution. And we would want another analogy, another thing to give you a picture of what this might look like. We would want the church to decide whether it should be a warship or a cruise ship. Now, I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you are in a landlocked country, you don't have warships. Maybe you're in a country that has engaged in war using warships. But there is a specific type of warship that is called an aircraft carrier. And the aircraft carrier is a large ship, not very beautiful to look at. And on it, on the deck, are all sorts of planes that are parked there, and then there's a runway. The battle is not happening on that ship. That is where the soldiers go, the pilots go, and they receive their instructions for where that battle is taking place. They come to that ship and they have fellowship, and they eat and they sleep, and they see a doctor for healing if they need healing and encouragement from the people that they're with, and then they get sent off into the battle again. And we believe that the church needs to be like this type of aircraft carrier, that it doesn't have to be a pretty place, but it has to be functional in that it gives us the encouragement, the fellowship, and the safety, and the place where we can lament what is going on in the world out there, in our battles that we are involved in. But sometimes churches have chosen the other ship, which is what we call a cruise ship. Again, I don't know if you've seen a cruise ship, but a cruise ship, I'm told, is a beautiful ship where there is very good food and good fellowship and swimming pools, and it's a place where people go for holiday or for vacation. And so we go to this ship, and we take a deep breath, and it's good, and we're with friends, and we're enjoying ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as soon as you step off that cruise ship, it kind of ceases to exist for you. In fact, sometimes you'll ask people, they come back from their holiday, and you say, "Hey, how was your holiday?" And I don't even remember. That was a couple days ago already. I'm back in the work world. That is not how the church should be, that when we step out of the building, when we step off that cruise ship, that it ceases to exist for us. But rather, what we want to be able to do is to step out of this warship. And I know it's not a great analogy thinking about war, and people sometimes don't like comparing that with Christianity, but we're told that we are fighting against principalities and powers of darkness, and we are engaged in battles, and each of us have different battles. And when we are gathered, we are equipped to take that fight, to take that representation, to take that ambassadorship, and to take it out to every place. And so we want to encourage the church to move from being a cruise ship, a place where people come and enjoy, to being a warship where people are coming and they are being equipped so that they can go back out and do the work that God has called them to do. There's another thing that we think will help reconcile our members and the leaders of our churches. And it's an exercise that we actually ask business owners to do. We ask business owners to think about how many clients and customers they might have in a given week. We ask them to think about how many competitors or suppliers or vendors that they're working with. We think about the families ask them to think about the families that are being supported through the business, whether it's the employees and so on, and to add up the number of people that are impacted by this business on a weekly basis. And what we find is that for the average small business, they encounter about 100 people per week on average. When you think about an average-sized church, to compare the two, is about 150 people. On a given Sunday, most churches, if it's a good Sunday, you might have 4 or 5 people who are visiting. All right, so keep those numbers in your head. You've got the church with 150 members, a few people visiting each Sunday. You've got a business that's interacting with 100 people per week. Now what I want you to do is remember back to the very first session when we asked you to talk about what % of the adults in your church are part of the marketplace. And from our gathering, I don't know what your discussion was like, but from the work that we've done and the people we've talked to, we've found that about 85 to 99% of the adults in our churches are engaged in the marketplace. So if you have a church of 150, let's drop it even lower. Let's just say 100 people are engaged in the marketplace. If 100 people are interacting with 100 people every week, we do the quick math on that, that's 10,000 people. Now, most pastors that I know are not able to meet with that many people in the course of 1 week. Or is it 1,000? 10,000. They're not able to meet with that many people, regardless, whether it's 1,000 or 10, they're not able to do it. And so the challenge that we want to put before pastors and marketplace ministers is that the opportunity is exponential when every person is released to be an ambassador for Christ in their workplace. It's not that those 100 people are all going to come to church with you, but imagine if you each identified 1 or 2 people, how that number might grow over the course of time. And so it's an exciting thing to think about. But I want to share with you right now my favorite quote. This is a quote that I'm going to repeat for you so that you hear it again, and I would encourage you to think about it. It's a quote from a man, his name is Ed Silvoso, and he wrote a book called Anointed for Business. And he said that Christianity is like a football game. If you're in North America, we talk about soccer, but for the rest of the world, football. Christianity is like a football game. 20,000 spectators in desperate need of exercise, watching 22 players in desperate need of rest. All right, let me say it again. Christianity is like a football game. 20,000 spectators in desperate need of exercise, watching 22 players in desperate need of rest. Do you see it? Who are the spectators? The spectators are Christians. They are Christ followers who come to church on a Sunday and they pay a fee to come in and watch the football game, and they need exercise, but they're not being played. They're watching from the sidelines. And then we look at the players, and who are the players? The players are the pastors, and they're exhausted. They're in desperate need of rest. And this becomes a challenge for them because they are the ones that are playing the game, and there's no one to relieve them. I remember I was teaching at a seminary, and a pastor was to come and do devotions that day, and he sent me a text message before class began, and he said, I'm not going to be able to do devotions. I apologize. There was an emergency in my church. So he came in about 3 hours late to class, and I met him, and I said, Pastor, what happened? And he said, oh, one of my members had an emergency. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Are they okay? Oh, yeah, they're okay. They had a business. They had a lorry. This was in Kenya. They had a lorry that was coming from Nairobi to Kitale, and the truck broke down in a city called Eldoret. And I said, oh, okay. So I'm in my mind, I'm going, why was he late then? And I'm thinking, oh, he must be a mechanic. I said, oh, you're a mechanic. She called you to go out there and help fix the truck. No. She called me at 2 a.m. and she was just, really upset. And she's my member. And so I had to just go be with her and pray with her. And I thought, wow, you are a pastor. Your phone is on 24 hours, and you are seeking to meet the needs of people, and at your own expense of sleep, at your own expense of the class that God has called you to take, and so on. And so we see that pastors are in desperate need of rest. And I said to the pastor, you know what? You have a mechanic in your church. I've met him. Next time, pray with her on the phone, and then call that mechanic and ask him to go out there and meet with her and see if he can be the one helping. But the idea is that for pastors, we want to be able to think about this football game and say, pastors, rather than being on the field, we actually need you to be the coach. The pastor has the important position of being the coach, having the big picture view of what is going on, and to be able to put the members on the field and say, you play offense and you play defense, and you haven't been playing very nicely. You need to sit on the bench for a while and take a rest. And so we have to think about this differently. We need pastors to be coaching. We heard from Dr. Walker in the New Testament that Jesus spent 18 years in the marketplace as a businessman. And because of that, it spilled over into how he taught and how he was able to relate to people. When we have pastors who are not spending any time in the marketplace, it becomes very difficult for them to relate to people. It becomes difficult to relate sermons and messages to people. And I found this in my own family. My father and my brother went straight from university into seminary, and straight from the seminary into leading a church. And while I would not tell them that they need to start a business or run a business, I do recommend very strongly that they put aside one afternoon a week or one lunch a week where they will go and meet a member at the workplace and just learn to listen and ask the questions, what is God doing in your place of work right now? Knowing and believing that God is sovereign and there's no place that he isn't working, what is he doing in your workplace? And how might he engage you and want you to engage him in what he is doing? And so those are the challenges that we have. If the coaches are not familiar with the game, or if the coaches are the ones on the field and the players are sitting as spectators, we have it upside down and we need to make some changes. In your handout, you will see a continuum, an arrow that has certain places marked on it for where we believe we are in terms of reconciliation for ourselves between our work and our faith. And it starts all the way at -3 and it goes all the way to +3. And so you can read through what the different numbers mean. But in essence, if you are at -3 on this continuum, it means that you have no awareness of the need to integrate your faith in your work. If you're at a -2, you have a beginning of awareness. At -1, you begin to push back against the ways of the world to have a biblical worldview. When you end up at 0, right in the middle of that continuum, it means that you are standing on your faith, that when you go to work, you are trying to live out your faith in your work. But we want to go further than that. We want to go to number 1, where we begin to have an impact on the workplace itself. And number 2, we are going further with that as to the business as a whole. And number 3, we begin to have an impact on culture. Now, we have done research, we have done long-term studies of what this looks like for churches who do a marketplace ministry. And we'll be sharing a little bit more about that with you soon. But one of the things that we have seen is that over the course of 2 years, where a church is teaching and preaching on this and doing discipleship and equipping, we thought that we would see people go from -3, where they have no awareness, all the way over to 3. That's what we were hoping. Culture is changing. We are seeing just massive growth and opportunity and change. And so when we did our 2 years of research, we asked people to put themselves on the scale. Where do you think you find yourselves? And most of them said they were at -3 and -2. They had no real awareness that their faith and work should be connected. 2 years later, we asked them where they found that they were at, and most of them said they were between a 0 and a 1, which meant that they were starting to stand on their own 2 feet in terms of their faith and their workplace, and they were starting to have an influence beyond themselves. But the reality is, this is something that takes time. If you know anything about trains, when you want to stop a train, it takes a long time to make it stop, and when it wants to get going again, it takes a long time to get it going. And that's like what this is. The world has ingrained in us a way of doing work that is, work is a burden. Work is only for my pay. Work is only for a sense of identity. And to change our mindset, to begin to do work as an act of worship takes time. We have to unlearn some things and we have to relearn some things. And so that is why we are saying that the need for reconciliation is not a Band-Aid that's needed. It is a deep cut between the sacred and the secular. The divide is big. The chasm is huge. And so it's going to take time to repair that and intentionality, which is why we recommend a marketplace ministry in every church. The counterculture church seeks to see the church that is gathered to be equipped to be the church scattered as members, as ambassadors of reconciliation, bringing God's message of reconciliation between man and man, between man and business, and between God and man. And so that is what we want to look at when we look at this idea of the need for reconciliation between church and people. I want to move right on into the consequence of sin between people. And we recognize that there is an opportunity and there is also a big deficit in how people relate to each other in the marketplace. As I said a few minutes ago, business as usual moves work as worship to work being a burden. And so how do we begin to change our perspective on that? What are the challenges that your members face every day and every week when they work in the marketplace? Again, some of us are familiar with it because we are there, but others of us might not know that. And so we want to explore some of the challenges and try to see how we can turn those into opportunities for reconciliation. When we understand work as worship, we begin to understand the potential of the majority world for this century. I don't know where you're listening from, but when we talk about the majority world, we're talking mostly of the southern hemisphere. We were talking about South America, Asia, and Africa. And the potential that is there, especially in terms of population, is staggering when we think about it. But how we see and understand the world determines the world that we see and understand. And often we have an incorrect perception as it relates to people. We believe that people are not a problem, people are the solution. And yet there tends to be a fear of population. In the 1950s or so, there was a lot of fear that we would run out of food. We would not be able to feed all the people in the world. In 1950, there was about 2.5 billion people in the world. And at that time, there was a fear that we would run out. Today, we are at almost 8 billion people, and there's more than enough food to feed everyone. Again, not everybody has enough, but that's not because there isn't enough. It's that some that are hoarding more and taking more than their share. Other parts of the world have severe challenges in terms of the environment to be able to grow. And so we can see that the earth has the capacity to care for 8 billion people, and they project that that number is going to go up to about 11 billion by the year 2100. Now, when we think about this, we see that the dominant population growth is going to be in Asia and in Africa. They believe that by the year 2050, 1 in 4 people will be Asian, 1 in 4 people will be African. But by the year 2100, that number is going to grow even more, so that 1 in 3 people will be Asian, 1 in 3 people will be African, and 1 in 3 people will be everyone else. What does that mean? For a lot of people that we talk with and that we meet with, they see this as a problem. But we believe that we don't have problems, we have opportunities. And people are not the problem, people are the solution, because they are made in the image of God. They are made with the mandate, with a purpose, with a calling, with the inclination of their maker, which is to be problem solvers and to do things that will help this world to flourish. What does that mean? What does that look like? Why are we seeing some of these trends? Well, what we are seeing is that the population is changing worldwide. As we look at North America and as we look at Europe, we are beginning to see negative population growth or flat population growth. In Europe, when we take that as an example, you have a man and a woman, and they have 1 child. When the parents die, there's 1 person remaining. It means that we have a negative growth rate. In North America right now, we have a husband and a wife. They have 2 children. When the parents die, there's 2 remaining. It's a flat growth rate. There's no growth. But in much of the majority world, we see a positive growth rate. We see that people are still having more children than there are parents. The reason for why we have children has also begun to change, and that's why we see this throughout the world. In fact, right now, China, the population in China is slowing down, and India is expected to pass China in several years. And the reason is because as we increase in wealth, we tend to decrease in the number of children that we have. We no longer have children because we need them to farm, because we need them to take care of us in our old age, because we fear they might not live past the year 5 years of age, and so we have more children. We begin to have children because of what we want. And children are a lot of work, and they are expensive, and so you begin to see the population go down. Now, why is this relevant? Well, we believe that the majority world has the population to be the problem solvers for the world and for the church going forward. And the reason is that the population there is going to continue to grow. The population in Africa that is Christian is growing faster than on any continent in the history of the world. And so Africa is coming to Christ and has come to Christ faster than any other place. And there's a potential then to be change agents for the rest of the world. This has become a global village. Everywhere you go, you find people from almost every nation around you, and that has the opportunity to bring influence with that. But what do we mean when we say that people are not the problem, people are the solution? And I want to talk about Bangladesh for a minute. Bangladesh in the 1970s was a food insufficient country. It did not produce enough food to feed the 75 million people in that country. When you fast forward from the 1970s to today, Bangladesh has doubled its population, 150 million people, and you would think if they couldn't feed 75, they certainly can't feed 150 million. But they are a food exporting country now. They produce enough food to feed their 150 million people, and they are exporting food. They haven't taken additional land. They haven't, annexed the countries around them. It's because people are problem solvers. People made in the image of God bring that creative solutions to help people flourish by the work that we do. And so we want to change our perceptions to say that the poverty that we see around us is really just a lack of development of people who have the capacity to bring solutions to the world, and they are not simply to be receivers of donations and gifts. And that's good to help people, but we want to see them to be able to have the dignity to help themselves and produce solutions for the rest of the world. Something else about the developing world that we want to, or the majority world that we want to look at, is the median age. And the median age across Africa is about 17 years old. The median age across India is 27 years old. The median age in South America is about 30, and so on. But the median age in North America is about 40 years old, and in Europe it's about 43 years old. So what that tells us, again, is where are you going to go for a labor force? It's going to be to Africa and to Asia. You're not going to put new factories necessarily in countries where the labor force is getting older and not wanting to do that type of work. And so those are things that we want to think about with excitement. What does it mean for the church to have a young population? Now, with every population age group, there's challenges and opportunities, but what does it mean as it relates to becoming the breadbasket for the world and becoming a place where people will go to see new technology developed and where the youth are inspired to run and to be able to do the things that God has given them to do? So we need to change our picture of people as the solution to the challenges and the opportunities that we face. There are many issues that we do face, and yet people, again, are not the problem. People are the solution. We're going to stop for this session, and when we come back, we'll continue on with our dialogue about how we need to be the agents of reconciliation. But I hope and pray that you begin to hear that people are God's answers for the miracles that sometimes we pray for. And the miracles are sometimes all around us and the people that are there. We need to help them unleash that and begin to release their potential to do their work as an act of worship, and then we will see change coming. Thank you so much for your attention today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.